So, to be fully honest with you, I'm kind of just waiting for the Pacific content to arrive for Battlefield 5 now. For the last 12 months or so, I think we've had a really tough time as Battlefield fans. We've had to endure endless development issues, delays, cancellations, bugginess, and just general disappointment. All of that has really taken its toll. I think it shows in the confidence of the player base that's left playing Battlefield 5 right now that the bar of expectation for the Pacific is kind of set quite low. Probably the lowest it's been for a while. And that's a real shame because we also know, based on past experience, just how good things can really get for this franchise. It wasn't too long ago that, as a community, we rode through that resurgence of Battlefield 4, which is now still a very popular modern first-person shooter. We were all taken by surprise by Battlefield 1, DICE developing a World War I-based first-person shooter, and at the same time, they took the gaming world by storm. We all know how awesome this franchise can be. But with Battlefield 5, we really have slid all the way back down to the bottom. I think we've pretty much hit rock bottom. And I don't think it's an understatement to say that. I don't think I'm exaggerating when I say it. When you look at how good things have been that have come before, and then you look at where we are now, I think it's very clear that we are in a true low point for the Battlefield franchise. But if you're a frequent watcher of this channel, then you will know that I'm always trying to look and find positives in any given situation. I don't really enjoy being a person that has to deliver bad news all the time. I certainly don't enjoy having to point out things that have gone wrong and things that shouldn't happen again, or where different decisions could have been made that would have made something much, much better. I don't enjoy being that person. I like being upbeat. I like being energetic and positive. I'm an optimist. Through the last 12 months with Battlefield 5, it has been very, very hard to maintain any kind of positive attitude towards the game, but despite all of its issues, we are still here playing. We're still grinding ranks, unlocking Tides of War items, playing on the new maps that arrive, the different game modes. We're still here. And I think that shows that we know things will get better. Things always get worse before they get better. And I think now we really are going to see Battlefield 5 going from a proper disappointment into something better. The Pacific is a massive milestone for Battlefield 5, but I think it's also a massive milestone for the DICE studio as well. A big content rotation like this, spinning the game towards a brand new theatre of war with all of those new weapons, maps, vehicles, factions, cosmetics, gadgets, game modes, and even more. That is a massive undertaking. I often see comments on my videos or on social media where people complain that the Pacific content is taking too long, and they're annoyed that DICE hasn't released it sooner. A lot of work has to go into creating a huge game overhaul like this. For example, all the new voice acting, that needs to be scripted and recorded for the American and Japanese factions. Then all of that audio needs to be connected to the different soldiers being created for the different factions. Those soldier models are the final product of thousands of hours worth of art and animation. The maps, they have to be started from a blank canvas using photogrammetry, images taken out on location in the Pacific, and then weaved together to create textures and assets. Lighting has to be properly developed again to make sure that when you run through areas of light and shadow that your game properly reflects that. Then there's the gameplay audio, things like weapon firing sounds, wind, explosions, tanks firing shells, plane engines, the crashing of waves. We are going to the Pacific after all. All of that has to be recorded, edited, mixed, and then laid out to almost perfection. The weapons themselves, they again have to be created from scratch because they're brand new. Animations for their reloads and movement, they all have to be created and linked into each different state that the weapon might be in. All this content in a rotation like this, moving Battlefield 5 from the European theatre for the first 2 years of World War II, and then into the Pacific for the next however long DICE decides to stay here, that is a monumental undertaking for any development team, let alone a development team that's been fighting to keep current content roadmaps somewhat on track and up to date. When you sit there and think about how you feel about Battlefield 5, how it might have frustrated you or angered you because something isn't working right or something isn't behaving the way you expected to, think about the amount of work that's likely gone into that single element to get it functioning the way that it currently is. it's very likely that it's taken a lot longer than you think, and the complexities of that single element alone, they stretch far beyond the surface. The surface is what you're just looking at and interacting with. There's so much going on behind the scenes. With all of that work in mind then, just thinking about how much effort and work is going to be needed to produce the Pacific Theatre for Battlefield 5, I think it's kind of indicative of why Battlefield 5 ended up the way that it has. What I think has happened with Battlefield 5 almost since the moment the game launched is the following. The game launched in a bad state due to a rushed development process to get the game out for that holiday season in 2018. So the DICE development team then had to use the first couple of months after the launch to fix the major issues that the game had. If you think back to late 2018, you might remember initially a very buggy and unreliable game, but by January, February time, the game was in a much better state. That's a few months of development time already. That time spent fixing what was needed to be fixed, that ate into the development time of post-launch content. The game was supposed to open up a new front of World War II in early 2019, the Greece location, and now we know that was Mercury and Marita. But those maps didn't arrive until June and July. That's mid-2019, so everything got pushed back because of that initial buggy launch. After those launch issues were somewhat cleared up, Firestorm launched in March 2019, and I genuinely believe that EA and DICE thought that that mode, the map, the Battle Royale experience, I think they thought it would last longer on the player base and sustain their interest for a lot longer than it actually did. In reality, the game mode barely remained relevant for longer than a month or so, despite plans to update and improve the mode. This meant, although there was content and activities to cover off a 3 or 4 month period with the Firestorm game mode, players in the community were basically done with it in a matter of weeks, and they moved on to waiting for the next big thing to arrive for Battlefield 5, which was of course still in development because they'd only played the biggest piece of content for a few weeks. The next big thing was, of course, the Pacific. At that time, we didn't know that was the case, but in the background, we now know that DICE has been working on that for quite some time. Because of the buggy launch of Battlefield 5 and the lackluster response to Firestorm, the DICE development team had to wait a little bit longer before they started their work on the Pacific for Battlefield 5. If the game hadn't had those early issues, then the Pacific might well have launched a little bit earlier than it's now slated to. At the time that Firestorm launched, I think the Pacific was actually in early development, and DICE believed that Firestorm and the Greek maps, spread over those 2 chapters of the Tides of War, they would satisfy their player base whilst they concentrated on something bigger behind the scenes. And then, unfortunately, after the release of the Firestorm game mode, the buggy nature of Battlefield 5 that DICE had just started to finish cleaning up, that kind of came all the way back again. Throughout Chapter 3 and into Chapter 4, the bugs, the glitches, the issues, they started to pile up again, further distracting players from the content that was actually planned for the game. What made things worse is that moving into Chapter 4, the content that was planned to launch was being shuffled around, it was being rescheduled, and in some cases, it was being cancelled because of the ongoing issues the game was facing and a change in direction within the DICE development team to focus on core multiplayer rather than anything else. This meant maps like Al Sundan, they ended up being delayed because they weren't performing as intended. The 5v5 competitive mode, that was cancelled because it was no longer a priority for DICE. That left a large gap in the roadmap. Rental server development, that was slowed down in order to fix more of the issues that kept arising. The issues kept getting compounded at every single turn, and the workload started to pile up higher and higher. This was all happening whilst a section of the development team in the background was working on content for the Pacific, almost hidden away from the anger of the community. I think those issues that cropped up through Chapter 3 and Chapter 4, those were occurring because the development team was basically split in half, with half of them trying to work and keep the current content roadmap on track, and the other half working on a huge chunk of content for the future. It made the situation seem like DICE didn't really know what to do to fix Battlefield 5, when in fact, and this is my own opinion here, I think they were doing the best they could at the time with a smaller team, whilst in the background the other team worked on something larger, much more impressive for the future. Essentially here, I think you can trace Battlefield 5's issues back to the very beginning, going back even further than the announcement of the game. We're talking going all the way back to when development started. Battlefield 5 was simply not given enough development time for it to come out of the gates a working, solid product. If it had been given more time, say like Battlefield 1, which began pre-development back in 2012, 2013 time, then it's very possible that the game would have been a lot more stable and a lot more secure. But I don't believe more development time would have fixed all of the problems the game's had. This identity crisis that we're still dealing with now, where we've got a chronological timeline of all this content coming out, but at the same time, some of that content is really garish and wacky, like the cosmetics that are straight out of the steampunk era. I don't think more development time would have fixed everything, but it would have at least given the game a chance to stand up as a working, solid product. And this is where I think that DICE has perhaps learned something and acted on something. Whilst we, the community, have been playing this game, we've had to endure months of disappointment and letdown. Behind the scenes with the Pacific content, the development team has been working to produce something much more enjoyable, impressive, and overall more fun than what we're experiencing right now. I think DICE was fully aware of the repercussions of what that might have done, and looking at what's happened with all the issues we've faced, those repercussions have presented themselves on countless occasions, but they took that step because they didn't want to make the same mistakes again and continue to try playing catch-up for the entire live service of Battlefield 5. The Pacific Theater might well be coming too late to the game for some players, but just like Battlefield 4, which took a good year to be fixed, DICE knows that they have a dedicated core player base of this game, and I think they want to do right by them. Things have been pretty bad overall for the first 12 months of this live service, but the last 2 months, the last couple of updates, the situation has picked up and things are looking more positive. I think the Pacific is DICE's current checkpoint that they want to cross, and in doing that, I really hope they have something epic, enjoyable, and big for us to sink our teeth into. For me, the Pacific content for Battlefield 5, that just cannot come soon enough. Operation Underground for the last few weeks has been a great experience. I'm sure once rental servers launch, we're going to see plenty of 24/7 Conquest servers of this running. It's going to be a staple of Battlefield 5 moving forwards, but I'm really looking for something to change Battlefield 5 up now, and I think the Pacific is that change. We've got a completely new location, new factions, weapons, vehicles, game modes, cosmetics, audio. Everything is going to change, I think. DICE knows how important it is to get this right. If they get it wrong, well, I don't really want to think about that. Thanks very much for watching today. Drop this video a like if you enjoyed it, a dislike if you didn't, and just let me know your thoughts down below in the comments. But until next time, I'll catch you guys in the next video.